Well, today is December 24th, Christmas Eve day, and it's a nice warm day outside. I decided to work on the quad outside. I decided to replace this bolt because the bolt that was on here when I got the quad was an SAE bolt that was too small. So I put it in a metric size bolt, the proper size, and a lock washer and nut to make up for the missing stock captive nut that goes on this. So that will suffice for my purposes. And now I'm going to mount this wheel. Okay, now I've installed the screws that hold this guard in place, and I've installed this shock, and the bushings on this shock are really badly worn out, but rather than wait for new bushings to come in, this is something that's going to be easy enough for me to change at a later date if everything else works out. At this point, same thing with the ball joints. The ball joints are definitely in need of replacement, but right now what I want to do is I just want to put it all together and see if it will run and drive. Once I've determined that it's going to run and drive and it's worth putting any more money into, then I'll order new ball joints and new bushings for all the shocks. And also I'll revisit the possibility of replacing some of these shock absorbers. Some of these look like they may have already been leaking. Okay, I'm going to get ready to install this half shaft, the whole shaft on this side, the axle. I got to put a new clip on that actually goes right on this groove here. And that's what allows the inner CV joint to snap into place. And before I do that, I'm actually going to hook the tie rod end that bolts up inside there through this hole, because I've got the other side still wide open, so I can bolt this up now, and then that way it'll be hanging out here and ready to bolt onto the knuckle when I install the knuckle. Alright, the little ball joints on the ends of the tie rods are pretty rough too. The little boots are all torn up, and again, ideally I'd like to replace these with brand new ones, but for the time being I'm going to reuse these old ones just so I can do some testing and make sure that everything else is going to work. Okay, I just inserted the axle. Basically that just slips over the spline, and once you get it past that new little snap ring in there, it engages, and that's what keeps this clipped in there. And I just let the axle hang down, and you insert it into the back of the knuckle, and then you mount the knuckle. And so I'm going to do that next. I also made sure I put a liberal coating of grease on the splines and on the shaft sticking out of the differential to make sure that that doesn't seize on there in the future, hopefully. And then I also put a light coating of grease on the surface that's going to actually rub up against the seal. I'm going to do the same here. I'm going to put a very light coating of grease here. That's going to ease the installation process into that seal on the back of the knuckle. Okay, today is December 28th, day after the end of the blizzard we had. Actually had a blizzard warning and everything. So we got a good amount of snow, but it actually pales in comparison to the blizzard of '78. But anyways, that last time I was out here working on the quad, I got stuck. I had trouble getting these bolts in on the knuckle, and that's because you have to have, if you have the ball joint stem inserted too far in, you can't get the bolt in, and if it's too far out, you can't get the bolt in. And it was getting kind of dark, and I couldn't see that, so I quit that day right there. And then the other thing, I went back and reviewed my notes, my video of when I was taking this apart, and realized that when I had put this arm on and that arm on, I had put them on backwards. So that arm is still on backwards. I have to switch it around. This one I just got finished switching around. So this is supposed to be facing down on the inboard side where it attaches to the bottom of the steering column, and that allows this to be facing down to attach to the knuckle on this side. I did get the bottom bolt in on the knuckle. Now I'm going to put the top bolt in on the knuckle. Again, these ball joints are clearly shot, but I'm just going to run them temporarily to make sure everything else works okay, and then I'll get the new ball joints in and install those at a later date. Okay, so I've installed the tie rod here, and it's in the proper orientation now. I've got the upper and lower bolts for the ball joints in on the knuckle. So now I'm ready to install the hub, but first I've got to install the brake disc back on the hub, And before I do that, I'm just going to run the brake disc across a wire wheel, that soft bronze wire wheel that I've been using. That way I can get the surface rust off of that disc. And then install it on the hub, and then install the hub onto here. Okay, I just got done cleaning up the brake disc with the wire wheel. And just to give you, I'll move over here into the light, give you an idea how that looks. This inner surface here I didn't bother cleaning up because that the discs don't come in contact with that when it's running, and they're just going to get rusted again anyways. So, but I did want to clean some of the heavier rust off of the surface that actually comes in contact with the pads. So now I'm going to, it's actually got some scoring on it, but I'm certainly not going to go through the expense of replacing this unit. So now I'm going to install this on the better of the two hubs that I cleaned up. Okay, I've got the two brake discs cleaned up and installed on the hubs. This one on the new hub and this one on the old hub that I'm going to reuse. Okay, now I'm going to install the hub assembly onto the shaft. I had some lithium grease on the splines. I just put some on there to make sure there was something to protect that from the foul weather out here. But now that I'm going to be installing it on permanently, I'm going to, or at least until I get the new ball joints, I have to take that apart again. I'm going to put some grease in there, and I'm going to use some of the grease that's left over from the packet, one of the packets that came with the CV joint boot kits. Okay, I've installed the hub. This is a light press fit into the bearing that is pressed into the knuckle. So the easiest way to get that started is to just slip it on over the splines of the shaft and make sure it's not cocked, and then take a metal sleeve. In this case I'm using this device that I've used a few times on this job, sliding it over there and tapping it on, and you don't have to hit it very hard, and it slides on. And then once you get it far enough on, you can actually use the hub nut to actually thread the nut on. The threads on the end here, very end, are a little damaged, but the threads here are good, which is all that matters. And you can do that and use the nut to actually help pull it into place. And once you've got that far enough onto the shaft, you can mount the disc brake caliper. I've mounted the caliper, and that's all set to go. But I've realized that I made another error here, which is I installed this shock. And before I installed the shock, I should have put this rubber block that actually holds the brake line and protects it into position. It actually sits in kind of like a cup area back here. So I'm just going to have to remove this bolt, pop the shock out, pop this into place, and then put the shock back in. And that'll rectify that. Right now I'm going to go back down into the basement where the rest of the parts are and find there's a small rubber, almost like a grommet, that fits inside this space right here. And I guess its purpose is to probably keep water from migrating in onto the spline shaft. I'm going to go find one of those and pop that in, and then it's just a matter of installing the large washer and torquing down the large hub nut. Okay, I've checked and I can't find the original grommets that came out of here. Being that they were rubber, I probably discarded them and just planned on ordering new ones. I'm going to go check my parts list and see if it's somewhere in the boxes of O-rings and stuff that came in. And if they're not, I'll probably just go to a hardware and industrial supply and find a rubber grommet or O-ring that will fit in there and do the job. Okay, here's the solution I've come up with to make up for this little rubber piece that's missing. I picked up an O-ring that fits over the shaft, and I'm just going to push this in, and it's a fairly decent fit. I'm going to tuck that in with a screwdriver, and once I get that tucked in, there's a little bit of a recess, I'm going to put some silicone adhesive sealant. This is 100% silicone rubber. This is it resists weathering, vibration, ozone, blah 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 blah. Also has extreme temperature performance, so that's going to act to seal this area and keep the water from migrating along the shaft here onto the splines in the back. And that'll suffice. Alright, this side's ready to go. The wheel's on. It does rock still, but that's the lower ball joint is really bad, so when I replace the lower ball joints, that'll tighten that up. And the other issue is this washer that's on this side is actually, the washer is supposed to be the right diameter so that the rubber end cup pops on here, and this washer here is not the right one. So I can't install the rubber cup that says Arctic Cat, which actually acts to keep the weather and elements from corroding this. So at some point I'm going to replace that washer with the right size so I can put the rubber end cap on here. But for now it'll be good enough to run. And then now I've moved on to this side. I've already reinstalled the upper A arm, which I had removed previously. I also installed the tie rod end correctly. I had it facing the wrong way on this side also, so I flipped it over and now that's installed. And I installed the screws that hold this firewall, or this backing material here, back in position. Now I've removed the fill plug on the differential. I'm going to make sure I've topped off the differential. I did find out that the proper fill point for the differential is just to the top of the hole here. So I'm going to add more diff oil until oil starts to come back out of the hole, and then I'm going to tighten up the plug with a brand new copper crush washer so that I don't have any leaks at that point. Okay, I've got the other side put together as far as the front end goes. Basically same procedure as on the first side. The only difference was I had to reinstall the upper A-frame member because I removed that on that side. And everything went together fairly decent. What ended up happening was the CV joint, actually that little clip inside the CV joint popped off. It wasn't properly seated, so I ended up having to pull the CV joint boot back and dig through the grease, get the clip out, and reinstall it. And I gave it a good test at the bench before I put it back in, and then it was fine. Then I slid the boot back on and I put a band, stainless steel hose clamp type of band on there, just because I had already installed the shaft on the quad and I didn't really feel like trying to pull that out again and go through all that. And so that's all set. And then I got the hub on. Then I had a really hard time with the hub nuts that go on the end of the axles. The newer axles are heavier, and the castle nut that I had, which was original, actually was a 16 millimeter that belongs on the older original axles. The newer axles require an 18 millimeter 1.5 pitch nut, and the nut that was on the side that had a heavier axle when I got the quad actually was an SAE nut that somebody was trying to get away with, just make work on there, which when I found out when I tried to tighten it, it didn't torque down properly. So since I wanted to try and see if I could get the thing running this weekend without waiting, I actually went and checked and found out that the Kawasaki Prairie 400 quad that I picked up, which is going to be the next project, actually its front hub nuts are the same size. They're 18 millimeter and 1.5 pitch. So I stole those off of there temporarily and put them on the quad. They're actually larger castle nuts, so the problem with those is that when you tighten them on, you can't insert the cotter pins. So I just torqued them on there, and I'm just going to use them for testing purposes, and then at some point this week I'll find a place where I can pick up a couple of the proper size castle nuts. So all I've got left to do on that side before I put the tire on is install a shock. Now this is the shock from that side. This shock was the one that had the upper plate. It's actually, the old one's not here, but the upper plate was missing or broken on this side. And that actually helps hold the spring in place and compression on the shock. The other problem with this shock is, I can actually demonstrate it by moving it. You can see it actually feels like it's completely devoid of any fluid being in the shock any longer, and it's completely shot. So that shock is junk. Now luckily I found a new old stock shock online and picked it up cheap. So I'm going to be able to take this new shock and I'm going to install it in the old hardware for that shock, the bad shock. And I also got a new plate. Hopefully I'll be able to put this together. Right, this is that clip, the new one that I got from Arctic Cat. And that actually goes on top of here. I can press the spring, it slides in, and actually that's what holds the whole shock assembly together. So I'm going to try and install the shock, put it back together and install it. Okay, first thing I need to do is I need to remove this piece, which is supposed to just slide over the shock and actually hit these nubs on the shock. And on this one, somebody actually tack welded it in position. So this collar is supposed to just slide over the shock and then hit these nubs, and that's what stops it from sliding off. Okay, I got this piece off. A couple light taps and it came right off. Luckily, whoever was trying to weld this didn't do a very good job, and they weren't able to get it to adhere really. So the blobs of metal on here that you see weren't really doing anything. And this is in kind of rough shape, so I should replace this, but I'm going to see whether or not I can use it just for tonight's purposes. And then just one last look at the shock, how bad this is. So that's junk. Okay, now the shock assembly, basically I went and looked at the shock that I hadn't disassembled, and basically this piece slides on here, hits these nubs, and that's what keeps it from going down that further. Then this large flat washer goes on next. Then this spacer, almost like a dampener, it actually helps keep the coil in position on the bottom here, actually goes in like that. And then our spring goes on like that. Now, the trick. The spring has to be compressed onto the shock enough so that this disc can be slipped onto here, and then it will snap into position like that and hold this spring in compression on the shock. So I'm going to have to try and figure out how to do that. Okay, so the first thing I did was I fully extended the shock. So just pulling it out slowly, extending this, gets this pretty close. So now I think I can actually just with brute force push down on this and get this to engage that clip and then tap this in, and hopefully I'll be able to get it to snap in. Alright, so here's what it looks like after it's assembled. You get the spring compressed and you slip that in there. And what I ended up doing was I was able to actually compress this spring by using both hands to force it down, and then I actually just had my wife come and slip this in to get this started. And then as soon as I got it started, I was able to just tap it in with a hammer, and it popped right in. And so now that shock is ready to go. So I'm going to go install this shock. Alright, here I am outside now. It's New Year's Day. Well, it's the early evening, late afternoon of New Year's Day. It's really nice and warm today. A lot of snow melted. Got the new half shaft in, new hub installed, the new shock assembly installed, and I've got, this is that hub nut that I was talking about that was such a problem. It's an 18mm 1.5 pitch. I stole those off of the Kawasaki Prairie just for now. I'll put them back on when I get the proper bolts, hub nuts for this unit. Now I've got to install the brake caliper here, and once again I forgot to route the brake hose through here before I bolted the bottom of the shock on, so I'll have to unbolt the shock, route the hose, install the caliper, reinstall the top bolt for the shock, and then I can put the wheel on this side.